The silence of the high desert was a living thing, a heavy blanket woven from the sun's relentless heat and the endless stretch of sagebrush. For Jedediah Miller, it was the sound of his life. Not a sound, but a profound absence of noise, a stillness that had settled in his bones over the 4 years since he had buried his wife and son on the small lonely hill overlooking his ranch. The land was unforgiving, but so was Jed. He had built this life with his own hands, a solitary fortress against a world that had taken too much from him. His days were a monotonous rhythm of mending fences, tending to his small herd of cattle, and watching the sun crawl across the vast, empty sky. He spoke to his horse, a stoic chestnut named Samson, more than he did to any man, and the words he did speak were few and far between. It was late afternoon when he found her. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the western horizon in hues of burnt orange and deep violet. Jed was riding the northern fence line, a section that bordered the treacherous canyon lands. He saw her first as a small, crumpled heap of rags and flesh against the base of a juniper bush. His first instinct was caution. The frontier was no place for a good Samaritan, and a lone man was a target. But as he drew closer, a prickle of alarm cut through his detached apathy. The heap was not an animal, nor was it a scarecrow left to rot. It was a person, a young woman, and she was clearly in distress. He dismounted slowly, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt revolver, not in preparation for a fight, but out of a lifetime of ingrained habit. He approached with measured steps, the soft thud of his boots on the dusty ground the only sound. As he knelt beside her, he saw that she was an Apache. Her dress, made of simple buckskin, was torn and stained with dirt and blood. Her long black hair was matted with dust and twigs. She was young, barely 20 perhaps, and her face, though smeared with grime, held a graceful dignity, even in unconsciousness. The most alarming detail was the gash on her temple, a deep, ugly wound that had bled freely and was now a dark, congealed mess. Jed felt a familiar cold knot form in his stomach. This wasn't a choice. It was a crisis. Leaving her was a death sentence. Taking her in was an invitation for trouble he couldn't fathom. The animosity between the settlers and the Apache was a constant simmering threat, and harboring one was a dangerous act of defiance. He had seen what happened to men who meddled in tribal affairs. It was a swift, brutal end. But as he looked at her pale, still face, a different, long-buried feeling stirred within him. It was a ghost of the man he had once been, the man who had loved his wife so fiercely and had been a father to his son. It was compassion. He gently touched her neck, checking for a pulse. It was faint but steady. He saw the shallow rise and fall of her chest. She was alive. A surge of protectiveness, foreign and unsettling, washed over him. He couldn't just leave her. He couldn't be that man. He had already lost his humanity once. He wouldn't lose it again. Making his decision, Jed carefully scooped her into his arms. She was light, impossibly light, like a fragile bird. He lifted her onto the saddle in front of him, her head resting against his chest. As he guided Samson back towards the ranch, the setting sun cast long, skeletal shadows across the land, and the great silence of the desert seemed to hold its breath. Jed knew this was a mistake, a monumental one, but he also knew that for the first time in years he had a purpose beyond just surviving. He was saving a life. The ride back to the cabin was a slow, deliberate one. Jed held the unconscious woman steady, his calloused hand resting protectively on her back. The familiar scent of dust, leather, and wood smoke that clung to his clothes was now mixed with something else. The faint, earthy smell of the desert and a whisper of a scent from the wild plants she carried with her. As they moved, the silence of the twilight was punctuated only by the soft thud of Samson's hooves and the creak of the saddle leather. Jed's mind was a whirlwind of calculations and consequences. Every instinct he had screamed at him to turn back, to leave her where he found her. But the feeling of her fragile weight in his arms, the faint, steady rhythm of her breath against his chest, kept him moving forward. He dismounted at the stable, tying Samson to the hitching post. He gently carried her into the small, single-room cabin, laying her on his cot. The room was Spartan. A cot, a wooden table, 2 chairs, a stone fireplace, and a small pantry. A simple, functional life, built for one. Now it felt too small, too quiet, and suddenly profoundly vulnerable. He lit a lantern, and in the warm, flickering light he saw her more clearly. The gash on her temple was worse than he had first thought. It was deep, likely from a sharp rock or a fall. He also noticed a series of smaller cuts and bruises on her arms and legs, evidence of a desperate, panicked journey. Jed found a clean cloth and a bucket of water, filled from the well. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew how to treat a wound. He had patched himself up countless times. He carefully cleaned the cut on her head, wincing at the sight of the dark, crusted blood. He noticed the intricate beadwork on her buckskin dress, the meticulous artistry of her moccasins. This was not a girl from the settlements. This was an Apache woman, a stranger from a world he knew only through campfire stories and the bitter prejudice of other men. Yet as he worked, he found himself thinking of her not as an Apache, but simply as a girl in pain. He gently applied a clean bandage, securing it with a strip of linen. For the rest of the night, Jed sat by her side, a silent vigil. He added logs to the fire, keeping the cabin warm. He watched her face, the quiet rise and fall of her chest, the occasional flinch or sigh in her sleep. He wondered what she was running from. He had seen no one else, no pursuers, but the sheer urgency of her flight was evident in every torn piece of her clothing and every scraped limb. A quiet curiosity began to replace his initial alarm. Who was she? What had happened to her? He had a name for her now, a quiet, internal one, the Silent One. It was a placeholder, a way to make her a person in his mind, rather than just an anonymous, dangerous burden. He dozed in the chair, a rifle resting across his lap, a habit he had never been able to break. The first rays of dawn crept through the cabin window, bathing the room in a soft grey light. Jed woke with a start, his hand automatically reaching for the rifle. He looked at the cot. She was still there, her breathing even, her face a picture of exhausted peace. A small, irrational wave of relief washed over him. She had made it through the night. The thought that she might live, that he had saved her, settled in his chest, a strange warmth he hadn't felt in a very long time. He got up to stoke the fire, put a pot of coffee on. As he worked, he glanced back at her. The bandage was still in place. Her breathing was steady. The danger was still there, outside, somewhere in the vast, unforgiving landscape. But inside this cabin, for this one fragile moment, there was just him, a lonely man, and a young woman he had chosen to save. He knew the world would call him a fool, a traitor. But as he looked at her, he couldn't bring himself to care. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and the quiet crackle of the fireplace were the first things Ayanna registered. Her head throbbed with a dull, insistent ache. She opened her eyes slowly, the world a blurry wash of soft amber light. Panic seized her for a fleeting moment. She was not in the wilderness. The low ceiling, the rough-hewn log walls, and the unfamiliar scent of cured leather and tobacco. She was in a stranger's cabin. Her hand flew to her temple, finding a soft bandage. The memory of the fall, the desperate flight, the jagged rock that had struck her, it all rushed back. She remembered falling, and then nothing. She sat up, her movements stiff and cautious, her gaze sweeping the room. He was there, a large, quiet man with a weathered face and a thick beard, standing by the fire, his back to her. He wore a simple flannel shirt and worn denim pants. He wasn't armed, not visibly at least. He was just there. He turned slowly, as if sensing her gaze. His eyes, a shade of deep grey, met hers. There was no hostility in them, only a quiet watchfulness. He held a tin cup in his hand. He gestured to the cup, then to her. "Coffee," he said, his voice a low rumble. It was the first time she had heard him speak. The word was a foreign sound on his tongue, but his meaning was clear. He was offering her a drink. Ayana shook her head slightly. She was cautious, alert. She was not a captive, not yet, but she was entirely at his mercy. She had to be careful. She spoke, her voice a dry rasp, the words coming in her native tongue. "Why have you brought me here?" Jed frowned, clearly not understanding. He set the cup on the table and sat in a chair opposite the cot. He pointed to her, then made a gesture of lying down. "You hurt," he said slowly, his words clipped and simple. Then he pointed to himself. "I help." Ayana understood the universal language of gestures. He had found her, and he had helped her. She looked at his hands. They were large, calloused, the hands of a working man. They seemed kind, but the world was full of men whose hands looked kind, but were not. Still, he had not hurt her. He had cleaned her wound and given her a place to rest. She felt a small, fragile spark of gratitude. She spoke again, this time more directly. "My name is Ayana." He listened intently, his head cocked to one side. He pointed to her again. "Ayana," he repeated, the name sounding strange but not unpleasant on his tongue. He pointed to his own chest. Jedediah." Ayana said the name, the syllables feeling unfamiliar. "Jedediah." She looked at him, truly looked at him. He was a solitary figure, his cabin a reflection of his life. There were no pictures, no trinkets, no signs of a family. Ayana understood loneliness. It was a feeling she had lived with, even when surrounded by her tribe. It was the ache of not belonging. She saw that same ache in his eyes. He got up and retrieved a bowl of thick stew from the hearth, where it had been warming. He set it on the table and gestured for her to eat. Ayana hesitated, but her stomach rumbled in protest. She hadn't eaten in days. The smell of the stew, rich with meat and vegetables, was intoxicating. She slowly climbed off the cot, her legs wobbly. She sat at the table opposite him, and he slid the bowl towards her. She ate slowly, cautiously at first, then with more urgency as her hunger took over. Jed watched her, a quiet satisfaction on his face. He didn't speak, he just watched her eat. In that shared silence, a small, tentative thread of trust began to form between them. In the days that followed, Ayana's strength returned, and with it, a guarded curiosity about the man who had saved her. The language barrier was a persistent wall, but they found a way around it with gestures, simple drawings in the dirt, and the universal language of shared tasks. Jed would point to a tool, say the word, and Ayana would repeat it. Her pronunciation, as careful as his, was patient. They spoke of the land, of the weather, of the animals. He taught her the names of his cattle. She taught him the names of the wild plants and the signs of the land that spoke of water and game. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in a spectacular array of reds and purples, they sat on the small porch of the cabin. Ayana had been cleaning and drying a small cluster of wildflowers she had picked. Jed sat, sharpening his knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape of steel on stone the only sound. Ayana looked at him, at his tired eyes, and the permanent set of sorrow in the lines around his mouth. She felt a sudden urge to understand the source of his solitude. She pointed to his chest. "Family?" she asked, using a word they had learned. Jed's face went still. He put down the knife, and for a long moment he said nothing. He looked out at the hill where his wife and son were buried, and a profound sadness emanated from him. He then pointed to the two small wooden crosses on the distant rise. "My wife, Sarah," he said, his voice raw with a pain that was still fresh, even after all this time, "and my boy, Jacob." He pointed to himself. "They are gone." He used a hand gesture, a sweeping motion to indicate they were no longer in this world. Ayana's heart went out to him. She saw the full measure of his grief, a weight he carried every day. She understood the true source of his loneliness. It wasn't a choice. It was a wound. She reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated empathy. Jed looked at her, surprised by the touch. He saw in her eyes a genuine understanding, a sorrow that matched his own. He then looked at her, gesturing. "You?" he asked. "You run. Why?" Ayana took a deep breath. This was a story she had to tell, a burden she needed to share. She began to draw in the dirt with a stick. She drew a series of teepees, a village. She drew a man with a stern face, then another with a fierce, angry one. She drew herself, and then she drew a binding rope between the angry man and herself. She then drew herself, breaking the rope and running. "My village, my chief, my father," she said, pointing to the figures. "He promised me to a warrior, Kicking Bear, a strong warrior, a powerful hunter." She pointed to the angry man. "I did not want him. He is cruel. My father said I must go, for the tribe. I said no." She made the gesture of breaking the rope again. "I ran away." Jed listened, his expression grim. He understood the story. A forced marriage, a desperate flight for freedom. It was a story as old as time, a story that transcended the chasm between their cultures. He saw not just an Apache woman, but a woman who had fought for her right to choose her own path. In that moment, the last of his prejudice fell away. He saw her as a kindred spirit, a fellow survivor. In their shared pain and their shared solitude, they found an unexpected connection, a fragile bond that was starting to feel unbreakable. The days settled into a comfortable rhythm. Ayana, no longer a helpless patient, began to help Jed around the ranch. It was her way of repaying the kindness he had shown her. She fixed the tear in her buckskin dress, patching it with skills Jed could only marvel at. She helped him with the smaller chores, her hands deft and efficient. She had an innate knowledge of the land, an ability to read the signs of the wild that Jed, for all his years on the frontier, had never possessed. She would point to a patch of dry grass and predict rain. She would find a trail where Jed saw only rocks. One morning, while Jed was mending a fence, he turned to see Ayana standing near the creek, her hands cupped, a smile on her face. She was splashing water on her face, the morning light catching the droplets. She looked so free, so at peace. It was the first time he had seen her smile, a genuine, joyful expression that transformed her entire face. Jed found himself smiling too, a feeling so foreign it felt like a physical ache in his chest. That evening, they shared a meal of venison stew that Jed had made. The fire was a warm, welcoming presence. They sat in comfortable silence, no longer needing to fill the air with forced words. As they ate, Ayana hummed a quiet, melodic tune. It was a song of her people, and it was beautiful. Jed listened, captivated. "What is that song?" he asked softly. Ayana paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. "It is a song for the sunset," she said, her English words a little slow but clear. "For a good day." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a new light. A good day with a good friend. Jed's heart skipped a beat. Friend. The word felt like a promise, a bridge across a great divide. It was more than he had hoped for. "A good friend," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. He cleared his throat. We are friends, Ayana." After the meal, they sat on the porch. The moon was a sliver in the inky sky, and the stars were scattered across it like spilled diamonds. The silence was no longer heavy or oppressive. It was a shared space of quiet contentment. Jed found himself wanting to know everything about her. He wanted to know what her favorite color was, what made her laugh, what her dreams were. He wanted to know her not just as Ayanna, the Apache girl he saved, but as a person, a woman he was beginning to care for in a way that scared him and exhilarated him all at once. He gestured to the stars. In my world, we have stories about the stars. They are a map. They are a promise. He pointed to a constellation, the Great Bear. We use it to find our way. Ayanna looked at the same constellation. In my world, she said, that is a hunter. He chases a deer across the sky. She pointed to a different constellation. And that is a woman, weeping for her lost love. Her tears are the small stars around her. Their stories were different, but their wonder was the same. In that moment, under the vast, shared sky, they were not a rancher and an Apache woman. They were just Jed and Ayanna, two lonely souls who had found a glimmer of light in each other. The air was charged with a new kind of tension, not of fear, but of possibility. Jed reached out and took her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it was loaded with the weight of everything that had happened and everything that could be. Ayanna did not pull away. She squeezed his hand gently, a silent acknowledgement of the hope that was now blossoming between them. Over the next few days, the bond between Jed and Ayanna deepened, transforming from a tentative friendship into something more profound. The unspoken feelings between them grew stronger, becoming a palpable presence in the small cabin. Their conversations, once limited by language, now flowed more easily, a mix of simple English, gestures, and a quiet, mutual understanding. Jed found himself sharing details about his life he hadn't spoken of in years. The thrill of building his first fence, the satisfaction of watching his herd grow, the simple pleasure of a hot cup of coffee at sunrise. Ayanna, in turn, spoke of her life in the Apache village, of her mother's wisdom, the traditions of her people, and the ceremonies she held dear. One afternoon, a light rain began to fall, turning the dusty earth into a rich, dark mud. They sat by the fire, the warmth a comforting contrast to the cool, damp air outside. Ayanna was working on a small piece of beadwork, her fingers moving with incredible speed and grace. Jed watched her, mesmerized by her focus and the beauty of the pattern she was creating. "You are very good at that," he said softly. Ayanna looked up, a faint blush on her cheeks. "It is for my mother," she said. "A gift." A pang of sadness crossed her face. "If I could give it to her." Jed understood. "The chief, the warrior, Kicking Bear," he said, trying to piece together her story. "Is he why you can't go back?" Ayanna nodded, her eyes distant. "He is a great hunter, a strong fighter. My father, he wanted him for me. He said Kicking Bear would be a good husband. He would protect me, provide for our family." She shook her head, a flash of defiance in her eyes. "But he is cruel. He sees women as property. He has a dark heart. I cannot be with a man like that." Jed's jaw tightened. He had heard stories of such men, both in the settlements and on the reservations. Men who saw strength only in force, who had no room in their hearts for kindness or respect. "You were very brave to run," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. Ayanna looked at him and her expression softened. It was not bravery. It was a choice between a life with no light and a chance for freedom. She met his gaze directly. "It was a risk. I knew I might die in the desert, but that was better than living with him." Jed reached out and took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it gently. "You don't have to worry about him anymore," he said, the words a quiet promise. "You are safe here." The air between them was thick with unsaid things. The rain outside seemed to amplify the silence. They were so close, their hands intertwined, their gazes locked. Ayana leaned in, and Jed did the same. Their lips met in a tentative, yet profound first kiss. It was not a kiss of passion or a stolen moment. It was a kiss of shared solitude, of mutual respect, and of a fragile, blooming love. It was a promise of a future that felt impossibly bright and terrifyingly dangerous all at once. For the first time since Jed's loss, his days were filled with a quiet joy. The simple presence of Ayana changed everything. The silence of the cabin was now filled with the soft sounds of her movements, the murmur of her voice, and her gentle laughter. Jed found himself wanting to show her his world, the one he had built in solitude. He took her to the small creek that ran through his property, a hidden gem he had always cherished. Ayana was fascinated by the way the water moved, by the small silver fish that darted beneath the surface. She, in turn, showed him her world. She led him to a patch of wild herbs and explained their medicinal properties, how her people used them to heal wounds and soothe fevers. She taught him how to read the clouds, to predict rain with uncanny accuracy, and how to listen for the subtle sounds of the wind that carried messages from miles away. Jed felt like a student, learning to see his own land for the first time. One afternoon, Jed decided to teach her how to ride his other horse, a gentle mare named Daisy. Ayana was hesitant at first, used to the smaller, hardier horses of her tribe. But Jed was patient, explaining how to hold the reins, how to communicate with the animal. Soon, Ayana was trotting around the pasture, her face alight with a mixture of concentration and delight. Jed watched her, a wide smile on his face, a genuine, unburdened smile that had been a stranger to him for years. They spent the rest of the day riding, exploring the rolling hills that surrounded the ranch. They stopped for a break near a small copse of cottonwood trees. The late afternoon sun filtered through the leaves, casting a warm, dappled light on the ground. They sat together, their shoulders touching, sharing a canteen of water and a handful of dried jerky. Jed looked at her, at the way the light caught the dark sheen of her hair and the determined set of her jaw. "Ayana," he said, his voice soft, I have a good life here. It is a lonely life, but it is a good one." He paused, searching for the right words. "But with you, it is better. It is more." Ayana turned to face him, her eyes shining. "Jedediah," she said, using his full name. "My life was dark, a prison. You gave me light. You gave me freedom." Their hands found each other, their fingers intertwining naturally. There was no need for grand pronouncements or dramatic declarations. The love between them was a simple, profound truth. It was a connection built on mutual respect and a shared sense of having found a safe harbor in a dangerous world. Jed leaned in and kissed her again, this time with a deep sense of a future found. It was a kiss that sealed their unspoken promise to each other, a promise to build a life together, right here on this lonely ranch. They returned to the cabin as the sun set, their hearts full, their steps lighter. They were no longer just two individuals. They were a unit, a small, defiant flicker of hope against the vastness of the frontier. The peace that had settled over the ranch was as fragile as the glass in Jed's cabin window. It was built on a foundation of shared moments and newfound love, a foundation that Jed knew could shatter at any moment. The world outside, the world of conflict and prejudice, was always there, a looming silent threat. Jed tried to put it out of his mind, to live in the bubble of their newfound happiness, but his instincts, honed by a lifetime on the frontier, were always on alert. He was riding the southern edge of his property, Ayana with him on Daisy. The morning was warm and clear, the air smelling of sun-baked earth. Ayana suddenly reined in her horse, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her body tense. Jed followed her gaze. He saw nothing, only the endless plains shimmering in the heat. "What is it?" he asked, his hand instinctively going to his rifle. Ayana shook her head slightly, her eyes still scanning the distance. "Smoke," she whispered, so low he almost didn't hear her. "Just there on the ridge." She pointed with a hand that was trembling slightly. Jed squinted, his eyes straining. He saw it then, a faint wisp of grey, almost invisible against the haze of the horizon. It was a signal fire. His blood ran cold. He had seen enough of those to know what they meant. It wasn't a signal for help. It was a message between different parties, or perhaps a warning. He felt a deep sense of dread. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the joy of the morning gone, replaced by a suffocating tension. Ayana's face was pale, her usual composure replaced by a deep-seated fear. She knew what the smoke meant. It was a signal, a sign. It meant they were close. Later that afternoon, while Jed was checking the fence line a few miles from the cabin, he came across a chilling sight. In the soft dirt of the dry creek bed, there were tracks. Not just a few, but dozens. Dozens of fresh horse tracks, all heading in the same general direction. They weren't the tracks of settlers or cattlemen. These were the tracks of Shoshone war ponies. He recognized the distinct shape of the unshod hooves. They were headed east, but a few tracks had splintered off, heading in a different direction, towards his ranch. Jed's stomach clenched. His heart hammered against his ribs. It wasn't an attack, not yet. But it was a scouting party. They were looking for something, or someone. The tracks were fresh, no more than a day old. He turned his horse and galloped back to the cabin, the fear a cold, hard knot in his chest. Ayana was waiting for him, her face a mask of worry. She saw the look on his face and she knew. He didn't need to say a word. He just pointed to the ground and made a gesture of many horses. Ayana's eyes widened, her hands flying to her mouth. She backed away from him, her fear a tangible thing. Her whisper was a single devastating word. "They're here." Jed didn't need to ask who she meant. He knew. The warriors from her village, the ones she had run from, they weren't just a threat anymore. They were a reality. They were coming for her. The peace he had found was gone, replaced by the grim certainty of an imminent confrontation. He looked at Ayana, his new-found love, and then at the wide, open plains that had been his sanctuary. Now they were a battlefield, and he knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that there was nowhere to run. The night was long and tense. Jed and Ayana stayed awake, talking in hushed tones, the silence between their words filled with the thudding of their own hearts. Jed checked his rifle, his shotgun, and his pistol. He laid out boxes of ammunition. Ayana watched him, her face a mixture of terror and resignation. She knew their fate was sealed. The sheer numbers against them were impossible to fight. "They will not stop," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "They will find me. The chief will not rest until I am back. He promised me to Kicking Bear." Jed knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "Ayana," he said, his voice firm, "I don't know what they want, but I will not let them take you, not without a fight." Ayana shook her head, her eyes pleading. "No, Jedediah, you cannot fight them. There are too many. They will kill you, and they will still take me." Jed saw the truth in her words, but he refused to accept it. He was a man of the frontier. He had faced down danger his whole life. But this was different. This wasn't a small band of raiders. This was an entire tribe, or at least a large party of their warriors, on a mission. This was a force of men coming for one woman, a force that would see his solitary stand as an act of war. As the first light of dawn broke, a heavy, cold fog settled over the canyon. It clung to the ground, obscuring vision, muffling all sound. It was an eerie, suffocating silence. Then slowly, The silence was broken. It was a low, distant hum at first, like the beating of 1,000 drums. Then the unmistakable sound of hooves. The ground began to vibrate with a deep, resonant rumble that Jed could feel in his bones. He and Ayanna stood on the porch, their hearts pounding in unison. Jed held his rifle, his knuckles white. The fog on the horizon seemed to part, and through the wisps of grey, a dark, moving mass appeared. It was a line of horsemen, their silhouettes tall and imposing against the pale light of the dawn. More and more appeared, a seemingly endless tide of men and horses. They moved in a disciplined, deliberate line, their movements silent, save for the thunder of their approach. Jed's mind tried to count them, but the numbers were overwhelming. He had seen war parties before, but never one of this size. 150 warriors, just as Ayanna had said. The line stopped just a few hundred yards from the cabin, a silent, menacing wall of men. They were a formidable sight, their faces painted, their bodies lean and powerful, their rifles and bows glinting in the morning light. The man at the front was the largest of them all, a massive figure with a stone face and a hawk feather in his hair. He sat his horse with the stillness of a mountain. Jed knew instinctively that this was Kicking Bear, the warrior Ayanna had fled. For what felt like an eternity, there was only silence. The two sides simply watched each other, a standoff of epic proportions. Then the man at the front raised his hand. A single warrior broke from the line, trotting his horse forward until he was halfway between the line and the cabin. He spoke, his voice carrying in the silent air, the words clear and sharp in Jed's ears. "We have come for the woman," the warrior shouted, his voice a guttural command. "The bride of Kicking Bear. Give her to us." He gestured back to the immense force of warriors behind him. "Or we will take her, and you will not survive." Jed stood on the porch, his rifle raised and steady, the weight of the cold steel a familiar, comforting presence in his hands. The warrior who had shouted the ultimatum sat silent on his horse, a stoic messenger awaiting a reply. Jed looked at the immense line of men behind him, a human wall against the horizon, a powerful, menacing presence that seemed to blot out the sun. The sheer scale of the force was designed to intimidate, to make any thought of resistance a ridiculous fantasy. Jed's heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic, desperate drumbeat. He was one man against an army. His life and Ayanna's freedom hung in the balance. Ayanna stood just inside the doorway, her hands clasped to her mouth, her eyes wide, with a terror she could no longer hide. "Go back!" Jed shouted, his voice a raw, defiant rasp that seemed to get lost in the vast, open air. "She is not a captive. She is free. She came here by her own will. She is her own person." The words felt hollow, a fragile protest against an unyielding wall of men and tradition. The warrior did not move. He raised a hand and made a signal to the leader, Kicking Bear, who sat silent and unmoving in the front of the line. Kicking Bear's eyes, dark and focused, seemed to bore right through Jed, a cold, hard gaze that held no trace of pity or mercy. Jed felt a shiver run down his spine. This was not a negotiation, it was a demand. Kicking Bear was a man of power and pride, and he saw Jed as nothing more than an obstacle, a worthless insect to be crushed. He would not be reasoned with. He was a man who had been promised a prize, and he would not rest until he had it. The messenger warrior turned back to Jed, his face a mask of contempt. He spoke again, this time his voice harder, more menacing, a low, guttural growl that was still surprisingly clear. "The bride belongs to the tribe. You have stolen her. This is a debt of honor. Give her to us, and we will leave you to your miserable life." He gestured to the ranch, a dismissive wave of his hand. "Keep her, and this place will be nothing but a grave for you and your kin. We will wait. We are patient, and we are many." Ayanna stepped forward, her hand reaching out to Jed's arm, her fingers trembling. "Jedediah, please," she whispered, her voice a desperate plea, a fragile sound in the vast open air. "This is madness. They are not like you. They will not stop. They will not reason. They will wait, and they will win." Jed did not take his eyes off the warrior. "I won't give you up, Ayana," he said, his voice low and firm, a voice that was filled with a new, quiet power. "Not to him, not to anyone." He looked at the messenger and shook his head slowly. "She is not yours to take. She is her own person. She has a right to her own life. Tell your leader that." The warrior's face hardened. He turned his horse and rode back to the line, the silent, unmoving army that was a monument to Kicking Bear's power. Jed could feel Kicking Bear's rage, a tangible force in the air, a hot, suffocating presence that seemed to fill the very space between them. The line of men did not move. They simply sat there, a silent, unmoving army, their presence a suffocating weight. The sun rose higher, casting a relentless heat over the standoff. Time stretched out, a long, agonizing wait. The air grew thick with tension. Every creak of the porch, every rustle of the wind through the sagebrush seemed to echo in the profound silence. The afternoon passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. Jed and Ayana took turns watching the horizon, their eyes fixed on the silent, unmoving line of men. The Apache warriors never moved. They were a patient, disciplined force, and their patience was far greater than Jed's. He knew they were waiting for him to break, to give in to the fear, the hunger, the unbearable pressure. They were masters of psychological warfare, and Jed was a man who was fighting a war he did not understand. He felt the weight of his decision, the immense crushing weight of his choice to stand and fight. As the sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows across the plains, Kicking Bear himself rode forward, his movements slow and deliberate, a show of power that was as chilling as it was impressive. He was a mountain of a man on horseback, his muscles hard and defined, even through his buckskin tunic. He stopped just outside of Jed's rifle range, but close enough for Jed to see the fierce anger in his eyes, the cold, hard certainty of his victory. Kicking Bear spoke, his words a low, guttural growl that was still surprisingly clear. "White man," he said, his English thick but understandable, "you are a thief. You have stolen my bride, the woman promised to me by her father. My honor is at stake. Your life is not worth my honor." He gestured to the countless warriors behind him. "I have many men. You have one life. I am a patient man. I will wait. This land will be your tomb." He raised a hand in a dismissive, arrogant gesture. "This is the last time I will speak with you. Give me what is mine, and I will show you mercy. Refuse, and you will find no mercy in your death. This is the way of the Great Spirit, and the Great Spirit favors the righteous." Jed felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. He wasn't just a simple rancher anymore. He was a fool who had dared to stand up to a chief, a man whose pride was as vast as the land they stood on. He looked at Ayana, her face a pale shadow in the darkening light, and he knew he had to stand firm. He was her only hope. He raised his rifle slowly, deliberately, a silent declaration of his intent. Kicking Bear's lips curled into a slight smile of contempt. He had been right. This man was a fool. He turned his horse and rode back to his line. The standoff was official. The waiting had begun, and Jed knew that this waiting would be the most agonizing part of the war he was about to fight, a war he was sure to lose. The first night was a brutal test of their resolve, a long, agonizing descent into the depths of their fear. The moon rose, a cold, indifferent eye watching the siege, its pale light casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to hold a life of their own. Jed and Ayana were trapped inside the cabin, the heavy wooden door barred shut, the windows covered with thick blankets. The darkness outside was an unknown enemy, a vast, silent presence that was filled with 1,000 unseen dangers. They didn't know if the warriors were still in the same position or if they had moved to surround the cabin completely. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle of the wind made them jump. Jed lit a single lantern, its dim light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the small, familiar room feel like a foreign, hostile place. He sat at the table, a map of his property spread out before him, his mind racing. He was a tactician of fences and cattle, not of war. He knew the land, every gully and ridge, every hidden spring. But what good was that knowledge against 150 determined men? They would find him. They would find a way. He was a man who was trapped, a man who had nowhere to go, a man who was about to die. "We can't fight them, Jedediah," Ayanna said, her voice a fragile whisper in the quiet room. She sat on the cot, her knees pulled to her chest, her body a small, trembling bundle of fear. "Please, you have to understand. They are not like your soldiers. They will not rush in. They will not fight a battle you can win. They will wait. They will starve us out. They will find a way to get me, and they will kill you in the process. This is a suicide mission for you. This is a battle you cannot win." Jed looked up from the map, his eyes hard. "What's the alternative, Ayanna? I give you up? You go back to a life you don't want?" "I won't do it. I can't. I promised you. I promised you your freedom. I won't break that promise. Not for them. Not for anyone." "I know," she said, her voice filled with an old, deep sorrow. "But if they kill you, what good is my freedom then? What good is my life? If I am to live, I must live with the memory of your death, and I cannot bear that. I would rather die with you than live without you." She stood up and walked over to him, kneeling beside his chair. She took his hands in hers, her gaze intense, her eyes filled with a new, quiet resolve. "I will go back. I will go with them. But you must promise me you will live. You must promise me you will not throw your life away. You must promise me you will be safe." Jed felt a surge of anger and protectiveness. "No, Ayanna, don't you talk like that. You are not going back, not to him. You are with me now." He stumbled over the words, trying to find the right ones to express the depth of his feelings. "I won't let them win. I will find a way. I will find a way to save us both." Ayanna shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "There is no way. There is only one choice, and it is for you to live, for you to be safe. You have to be realistic. You have to accept the inevitable. You cannot fight an army. You cannot win." Jed pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. He held her tightly as if he could shield her from the entire world, from the entire army outside. "I will not give up," he said, his voice a low rumble against her hair. "We will face this together. If you are to be with me, then you will face this with me. If you are to be my partner, then you will stand with me. You will not surrender. You will not give up." Ayanna was silent for a long moment, her body trembling slightly. She leaned into his embrace, her hands gripping his shirt. She knew the stubbornness of his heart. She had seen it in his eyes from the moment he had found her. It was the same stubbornness that had saved her life. She realized there was no convincing him. He was a man who would die for his principles, and his principle, in this moment, was her. She had chosen a man who would not let her go, a man who would fight for her with every ounce of his being. She had chosen a man who would not surrender. They decided to stand watch in shifts. Jed took the first watch, his eyes fixed on the darkness outside the window. The silence was broken only by the occasional cry of a coyote or the soft hoot of an owl. But beneath it all, he could feel their presence, a heavy, malevolent force. He saw the faint, flickering light of a distant campfire, a small, defiant beacon in the night. It was a sign. They were still there. They were waiting. When it was Ayanna's turn, she sat in the chair, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Jed lay on the cot, his body aching with exhaustion, but his mind refusing to rest. He watched Ayana in the dim lamplight, her profile illuminated, her eyes focused on the darkness. He saw a fierce strength in her, a resilience born of a difficult life. He knew he had not just saved a woman, he had found a partner. He felt an overwhelming surge of love and fear, a love so powerful it made him fearless, and a fear so great it made him want to fight for every breath she took. This was no longer just a standoff, it was a battle for their love and their future, and Jed knew he would fight to the last breath to win it. The morning brought with it a fresh wave of dread. The fog from the day before had burned away, revealing a clear sky and the silent, unmoving line of warriors on the ridge. The sun was rising, a blinding orb that promised another day of oppressive heat and unbearable tension. Jed and Ayana had barely slept. They had shared a small, cold breakfast, the food tasting like dust in their mouths. Then a movement from the Apache line. This time it was not Kicking Bear. An older warrior, his face lined with the wisdom of many seasons, rode forward slowly. He was unarmed, his hands held up, a sign of parley. Jed raised his rifle, but his finger was not on the trigger. Ayana's hand was on his arm. "Jedediah," she whispered, her voice hopeful, "this is different. They have sent an elder. He has come to speak. He has come in peace. We must listen." Jed, ever the pragmatist, saw a slim chance. He lowered his rifle. He could not win a fight, but he might be able to win a debate. He stepped onto the porch, his body tense, every muscle coiled and ready. The elder stopped his horse a respectable distance away. His face was stern, but his eyes held a glimmer of something that was not pure hatred. He spoke, his voice a gravelly monotone. "White man, we do not wish for bloodshed, but honor must be upheld. My name is Whispering Wolf. I have come to hear your words. Why have you stolen our daughter?" Jed took a deep breath. "I have not stolen her," he said, his voice steady. "She came here on her own. She was hurt. I gave her shelter. She is free to go wherever she pleases. She has chosen to stay." Whispering Wolf's expression did not change. Her father promised her to Kicking Bear. This is a matter of tribal law. She has brought great shame upon her family and her people. Kicking Bear's honor is at stake. He is a chief among us. If he cannot retrieve what is his authority will be questioned. He paused, his eyes piercing Jed's. "You have a choice. Return her to us, and we will leave you and your land in peace. Keep her, and the shame she has brought will be your death. This is the way of the Great Spirit, and you are a man who stands against the Great Spirit." Jed felt a surge of anger. They were talking about Ayana as if she were a horse or a piece of property, as if she had no will of her own. "She is not yours to give away," Jed shouted. "She is a person. She deserves a choice. She has a right to her own life. She's not a prize to be won." Whispering Wolf's eyes hardened. "This is not your way, white man. This is our way. You do not understand. Kicking Bear has given up many things to have her. He has given gifts to her father. He has shown his worth. He has staked his life on this. You are a ghost on this land, a man with no family, no tribe. You cannot understand the weight of these things. You cannot understand the sacred bond of the tribe. You are a man who is alone. You cannot fight us. You cannot win." Jed felt a cold knot of despair. He was trying to appeal to a sense of freedom and individuality that did not exist in their world. He was a fool. Whispering Wolf understood this. The elder then turned his gaze from Jed and looked towards the cabin. "Ayana," he called out, his voice now gentle, almost paternal. "I know you are there. I have come to speak to you. Your father is a broken man. The women of your family weep for you. They beg you to return. The tribe has been dishonored. Come back, and all will be forgiven. Do not let your pride destroy this white man and bring war upon our people. It is not our way. You are a daughter of the tribe. You belong to the tribe. You belong to your people. Come back, and you will be safe." Ayana, who had been listening from the shadows of the cabin, felt a profound internal conflict. She loved her family. She loved her people. The words of the elder were a weight on her soul, a heavy, crushing burden. Jed saw the turmoil on her face. He knew this was not just a battle for her body, but for her heart and her soul. He had to trust her. He had to believe in the love they had built. He took a small step back, giving her the space to make her own choice. The fate of all of them rested on her next words. Ayana's heart was a battlefield of its own, a silent, raging conflict between the world she was born to and the new world she had chosen. The words of Whispering Wolf, the elder, were like poison arrows, each one striking a different part of her soul, leaving a burning, indelible wound. He spoke of the sacred traditions she had abandoned, the solemn duty she had forsaken, and the shame she had brought upon her family. She saw the sorrow on her mother's face in her mind's eye, a picture of quiet, heartbroken resignation. She felt the pain of her father, a proud chief who had made a promise that had been broken not by an enemy, but by his own daughter. It was all a heavy, crushing burden on her soul. She had fled for her freedom, for her life, but she had not considered the devastating cost to those she loved. She looked at Jed, his face a picture of grim determination, his unwavering support, a source of both immense strength and profound terror. She knew with a cold, absolute certainty that if she went back, he would live. If she stayed, he would almost certainly die. The choice was not hers alone. It was a choice for his life. She walked out onto the porch, her head held high, her eyes fixed on Whispering Wolf. The elder looked at her, and for a fleeting moment a glimmer of affection crossed his face before it returned to its mask of sternness, of deep disappointment. He saw a daughter of his people, a woman who had once been a part of his world, now standing with a man who was an enemy. "Whispering Wolf," she said, her voice clear and strong, filled with a quiet dignity that belied the turmoil within her. "I hear your words. I hear the sorrow of my family. I know the shame my actions have brought upon them. My heart weeps for them, but my soul rejoices in my freedom." She pointed a hand to the line of warriors, a powerful, defiant gesture that held no trace of fear. "I will not return to a man who sees me as property, as a prize to be won. I will not be a prisoner in my own village. My father may have promised me, but he cannot promise my heart." Her words were a testament to the new world she was building, a world where a woman's heart was her own, a world where love was a choice, not a command. Whispering, Wolf sighed, a sound of deep disappointment that felt like a physical weight in the still air. "Your heart is in the wrong place, my daughter. You have traded your people for a ghost, a man with no future, a man who will surely die today. Kicking Bear is strong. He will not back down. He will not accept this shame. You have traded a life of honor for a life of shame." "He is a man of pride, not of honor," Ayana shot back, her voice filled with a cold, clear defiance that surprised even Jed. "And he is not my husband. This man, Jedediah, he is a man of honor. He did not ask for a reward for helping me. He did not demand that I stay. He has treated me with respect. He has given me a choice. Can Kicking Bear say the same? Can you? Can you look me in the eye and tell me that I am free to choose? Can you say that a woman's heart is her own?" The elder's face darkened. She had struck at the very heart of the conflict, at the very core of his people's traditions. He could not deny her words. "You speak foolishness, Ayana. This is the way of our people. A woman's choice is for her family to make. You have betrayed us. You have betrayed your blood. You have betrayed your name." "I have betrayed no one but myself," Ayana said, her voice now filled with a quiet power that Jed had never heard before. "I am a woman of the Apache people. I carry their blood. I carry their traditions. But I am also a person, and this is my choice. My choice is to stay here." She looked at Jed, and a soft, beautiful smile crossed her face, a smile that held all the love and all the courage in her heart. My choice is to stay with this man who has given me back my life, who has given me back my soul, who has given me back my choice. Whispering Wolf looked at Jed, his eyes now filled with a grim certainty. Ayana had chosen. She had thrown her lot in with this white man. He turned his horse and rode back to the line, his head bowed. The message was clear. There would be no negotiation. There would be no peaceful solution. Ayana had made her choice, and now they would all face the consequences. Kicking Bear watched the elders return. He could tell from Whispering Wolf's slumped posture that the parley had failed. Kicking Bear's face, which had been a mask of stoicism, contorted into a furious scowl. He raised his hand and made a sharp, decisive gesture. The line of warriors began to stir. They dismounted their horses, began to set up camp. They weren't leaving. They were settling in. They were going to wait out Jed and Ayana. They were going to starve them out, or worse. The siege was no longer a threat. It was a reality. And Jed knew that time was no longer on his side. He had to do something. He had to come up with a plan that would save both of them. A plan that would not only save their lives, but would also save his honor. The grim reality of the standoff had settled in, a suffocating weight on the small, lonely cabin. Kicking Bear's warriors were setting up a camp on the distant ridge, a silent, menacing presence. Tents were pitched, fires were lit, and the rhythmic beat of a single drum began to echo across the plains, a constant, low thrum that spoke of patience and an unyielding will. It was a sound that Jed had never heard before, a sound that filled him with a cold, creeping dread. The water from his well was not a deep one, and the small supply of food in his pantry would not last more than a week at the most. Ayana was right. They would wait them out. Jed's heart sank with the weight of the realization. He paced the small cabin, his mind a whirlwind of frantic, desperate thoughts. He looked at the map, at the land he knew so well. There were no hidden tunnels, no secret springs. His ranch was a fortress built for solitude, not for siege. He could try to sneak out, but against 150 experienced trackers it would be a fool's errand. They would catch him, and they would surely kill him. He looked at his rifle, a useless piece of metal in a war of attrition. He could not fight an army. He could not win. He was a man who was trapped, a man who had nowhere to go, a man who was about to die. Ayana watched him, her eyes filled with a quiet resignation. She had made her choice, and she was prepared to face the consequences, but she did not want Jed to die with her. She saw the desperation on his face, and it broke her heart. He was a man who had saved her life, a man who had given her a new beginning. She could not bear to see him suffer. "Jedediah," she said softly, her voice a gentle, calming presence in the midst of his turmoil. "It is not your fault. You have done all you can. We have to be realistic. We have to accept our fate. We have to be prepared." Jed stopped pacing and looked at her, his face a picture of grim determination, a new, sudden resolve in his eyes. "No," he said, "I'm not giving up. There has to be another way. I can't fight them with a gun, but I can fight them with my word, with their own customs." Ayana frowned, confused. "What do you mean? You cannot speak their language. You cannot understand their ways. You are a man of the white world. You cannot fight with their weapons." Jed pointed to the line of warriors on the ridge, to the smoke from their fires, to the rhythmic beat of the drum. "Their leader, Kicking Bear, he is a man of pride. He thinks I'm a coward, a thief. He thinks I'm afraid. I have to prove him wrong. I have to make him see that I am an honorable man, that you are here by choice." He took a deep breath, and the pieces of a desperate, crazy plan began to form in his mind. It was a plan that was as audacious as it was terrifying. I will go out there, he said, alone, without a weapon. Ayana's eyes widened in horror. Jedediah, no! They will kill you on sight. They will not give you a chance to speak. They will see you as a threat. They will see you as a coward. No, they won't, Jed said, his voice firm, his resolve unbending. Not if I go out unarmed. It's an act of respect. It's a challenge. It's their own custom. I have to appeal to their sense of honor. I will ask for a meeting with Kicking Bear. I will ask to be given a chance to prove my honor. Ayana was silent for a long moment, considering his words. She knew the customs of her people. An unarmed man, approaching with a plea for parley, would be granted a hearing. To kill him would be a dishonorable act, a sign of weakness and fear. It was a risky, desperate gamble, but it was a gamble nonetheless. It was better than starving to death. "What will you say to him?" she asked, her voice low. "I will tell him that he is welcome to take you if you choose to go with him," Jed said. "I will let you make your choice in front of him. But I will also demand a chance to prove myself. A test of honor, not a fight, but a challenge of strength, of skill. If I win, he has to leave you be." Ayana's eyes filled with a new kind of fear. A test of honor. Kicking Bear would choose a challenge that he was sure to win. He was a great warrior, a master of combat and survival. What chance did Jed have against him? She opened her mouth to protest, but Jed shook his head. "This is our only chance, Ayana. I can't fight them all, but I can challenge one man. I can challenge Kicking Bear. I have to make him see me as a man of honor, not just a ghost on his land. I have to give him a reason to listen." Ayana saw the grim resolve on his face. She knew there was no talking him out of it. She also knew that this plan, however crazy, was their only hope. She walked over to him and put her arms around him, holding him tightly. "Jedediah," she whispered, her voice filled with love and fear. "Be careful. My heart will break if you do not come back." Jed held her, his arms a fortress around her. "I will come back, Ayana, I promise." He knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep, but he had to try. He had to put his life on the line. He had to show Kicking Bear and the world that a man's love was worth fighting for, even if that fight meant putting his life on the line against impossible odds. The morning was still, the air heavy with the unspoken violence of a standoff. Jed stood in front of the cabin, his hands at his sides, his rifle lying on the porch, a useless piece of metal in this war of words and wills. The sheer audacity of his plan was what made it so terrifying. He was offering himself up, a sacrifice to a code of honor that was not his own. Ayana stood at the window, her face pale, her heart in her throat, her hands clasped in a silent prayer. Before Jed could take a step, a new voice cut through the tense silence, a loud, cheerful sound that felt completely out of place in the grim, foreboding landscape. "Hold on there, friend!" a voice called out. "What in tarnation is going on here?" Jed and Ayana both looked in the direction of the voice. A lone rider was coming up the trail from the west, a small, wiry man with a long, graying beard and a worn leather hat. He was dressed in the faded buckskin of a trapper and was leading a mule loaded with furs and goods. He rode right into the middle of the standoff, completely oblivious to the danger. The Apache warriors on the ridge sat up, their faces a mix of surprise and annoyance. The trapper, who was called Silas, rode up to Jed, his eyes wide with curiosity as he took in the scene. He looked at the immense line of warriors on the ridge, at the firelight and the smoke, then back at Jed, a single man standing against an army. "Well, I'll be," he said, shaking his head. "Seems you've gone and riled up the whole damned tribe. What'd you do, Jed? Steal a horse, rustle some cattle, rob a bank?" Jed was too stunned to speak. The sudden arrival of this man was both a blessing and a curse. He was a witness, a potential casualty, but he was also a bridge, a way to communicate. He was a man who knew the ways of the land, a man who had lived among the tribes for years. Silas dismounted, his movements easy and unconcerned. He looked at Ayana in the window, at the fear in her eyes, then at Jed, and a slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "Ah," he said, "I see. A woman." He turned to the Apache line, his face no longer filled with a comical wonder, but with a serious, respectful expression. He had been a trapper for 40 years. He knew the customs of the tribes better than any white man. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace and spoke in a halting but understandable version of the Apache language. He spoke for several minutes, his words flowing from him with a practiced ease. He explained to the chief that he was a neutral party, a man of the woods, a friend to both sides. He asked for a parley, a chance to hear both sides of the story. The Apache line remained silent, their eyes fixed on Jed and Ayana, but the trapper's words seemed to have an effect. They were not met with arrows. Kicking Bear himself rode forward, a look of contempt on his face. He was a chief, a man of pride, a man who was not used to being challenged. "Who are you, old man?" he asked in the Apache language. "This is a matter of honor between a white man and a chief. It does not concern you." Silas replied, his voice calm and firm. "It concerns me when my friends are about to die and when a foolish chief is about to start a war. I have heard the white man's story. Now I wish to hear yours. Ayana is with this man, Jedediah. She has chosen him. You cannot take her by force. It will lead to bloodshed, and it will be a death that will not bring you honor." Kicking Bear's eyes narrowed. He looked at Jed, then back at Silas, and then at Ayana. He saw that they were a united front. The presence of a neutral party was an unexpected twist, a complication that he had not planned for. It was a sign of weakness to refuse a parley. He was a chief, a man of honor. He had to at least listen. He made a gesture with his hand, a sign of reluctant acceptance. Silas turned to Jed and said, "Well, Jedediah, seems you've got yourself a meeting. The chief will speak with you. He's a proud man. Don't you talk to him like a boy. You talk to him like a man. And you tell him your side of the story. And you pray to God he listens." Jed felt a surge of relief mixed with profound terror. The trapper had given him a chance he would have to take, no matter how dangerous. He looked at Ayana, and she gave him a small, encouraging nod. The fight was about to begin, but it would be a fight with words, not with guns, and Jed knew that in this fight he was in a world he did not understand, but he had to fight for the woman he loved. The meeting was set for a small clearing, halfway between the Apache line and Jed's cabin. Kicking Bear arrived with two of his most trusted warriors, a silent, menacing presence that spoke of his power and his authority. Jed was accompanied by Silas, the trapper, who would act as a translator and a witness. The air was thick with the weight of the moment, the fate of a love story, and the possibility of a war, all hanging in the balance. Kicking Bear was even more imposing on the ground than on his horse. He was a mountain of a man, his muscles rippling under his tunic. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had never known defeat. His eyes were dark and cold, filled with a deep-seated contempt for Jed. He saw him as a weak, soft white man, a scavenger who had stolen what was rightfully his. "I have come to hear your foolish words, white man," Kicking Bear said in his deep, guttural voice. He pointed a finger at Jed. "You are a thief. You have taken what is mine. My honor is at stake. The Great Spirit has promised her to me." Jed took a deep breath, forcing himself to remain calm. He knew that any sign of fear would be a sign of weakness. "I am not a thief," he said, his voice steady, his gaze unwavering. "I am an honest man. I have not stolen Ayana. She came to me, a scared, hurt girl. I gave her shelter. I did not take her by force. She has chosen to stay with me." Silas translated Jed's words, his voice a low hum. Kicking Bear's face remained a mask of disdain. A woman's choice is for her family. Her father gave her to me. She is a bride. She must fulfill her duty to her people. Her actions have brought shame to her family. Jed felt a surge of frustration. They were not speaking the same language. Kicking Bear was speaking of a world where a person was a part of a tribe, where their life was a part of a larger, more sacred plan. Jed was speaking of a world where a person was an individual, a world where a person had a right to their own destiny. Her father may have given her away, but he did not give away her heart, Jed said, his voice rising in anger. Her heart is her own. She is her own person. She has a right to choose her own life. Kicking Bear let out a short, harsh laugh. A person? What is this word? A woman is a woman. She is the mother of our sons. She is the keeper of our traditions. She does not run from her duty. She does not choose her own path. She follows the path laid out for her by the Great Spirit. And her path leads to me. Silas translated the words, and Jed felt a cold knot of despair. Kicking Bear's worldview was entirely different from his own. Jed was a man of the new frontier, a man who believed in a person's right to choose their own destiny. Kicking Bear was a man of the old world, a man who believed in the primacy of tradition, of honor, of duty to the tribe. Jed looked at Kicking Bear, a sudden resolve filling him. He would not give up. He would not surrender his love. He looked at the chief, his gaze unwavering. "I have a proposal, Chief," Jed said, "a test. You say I am a coward. You say I am a fool. Let us settle this not with violence, but with a contest of skill, a test of honor. If I win, you will let Ayana go. You will leave this land in peace. If you win, then I will accept my fate. But Ayana will still have the choice. She will have her freedom. You cannot take her by force." Kicking Bear's eyes narrowed. A test of honor. It was a time-honored tradition. It was a way to settle a dispute without a full-scale war. He looked at Jed, seeing the stubborn defiance in his eyes, and a slow, confident smile spread across his face. This was a man who did not know his place. This was a man who would soon learn the meaning of defeat. "I accept," Kicking Bear said, his voice filled with a chilling confidence. He looked at Jed with an arrogant, triumphant expression. "I will give you your test, white man, and you will fail. You will see what it means to cross a man of honor, and I will take back what is mine." The air, which had been thick with tension, now hummed with a different kind of energy, one of solemn tradition and impending fate. Kicking Bear, with the chilling, almost casual arrogance of a man who knew he held every advantage, chose the challenge himself. His voice, a powerful, resonant rumble, cut through the quiet, carrying a sense of finality. It would not be a brutal, bloody test of combat, which, in his eyes, would have been a waste of a good warrior and a lesser man. It would be a test of skill, of endurance, of survival, of a man's cunning and his connection to the very earth they stood on. It was a test designed to prove not just a man's strength, but his soul. "We will race," Kicking Bear announced, his gaze fixed on Jed, his eyes holding a cold, triumphant gleam. "Not on horses, which are but tools of your world. We will race on our own 2 feet. We will race to the top of the Twin Peaks, a journey of 5 miles across this hard land, and back. The first man to return to this spot with a stone from the Great Spirit Spring is the winner." His lips curled into a slight, mocking sneer. "But there is a twist, a challenge of the spirit. We must each carry a stone from the Great Spirit Spring at the bottom of the peaks. The stone must be from the spring itself. If your stone is not from the spring, you have not completed the test. If you lose your stone, you lose your honor." Jed's heart, which had been a wild, frantic drum in his chest, sank into a cold, heavy knot of dread. He knew the Twin Peaks. He had seen them every day of his life from his porch. They were a pair of jagged, treacherous granite spires, riddled with cliffs and treacherous footing, a brutal, unforgiving climb. The spring was in a deep ravine at the base of the peaks, a difficult climb to begin with, and a dangerous one to make in the heat of a race, and Kicking Bear, Jed knew, was a master of the land. He was light on his feet, a man who had been running since he was a boy, accustomed to long distances and brutal terrain. He was a man of the plains, a man who ran with the speed and agility of a wolf. Jed, in contrast, was a man of strength, a rider of horses, a man of hard, laborious work. He was strong, but he was not fast. He was a man of muscle, not of agility. The race was designed to be his certain defeat. Silas, the trapper, translated the terms, his face a grim, weather-beaten mask of concern. "Jedediah," he said, his voice low, his eyes filled with a quiet, knowing sorrow. "This is a foolish race. He has the advantage. He is a runner. He will win. He has chosen a test where you cannot win." Jed's gaze remained fixed on Kicking Bear, at the arrogant confidence on his face. He knew Silas was right. He had no chance. All of his skills, his marksmanship, his ability to build, his quiet resolve, were useless in this test. This was not a test of his world. This was a test of Kicking Bear's world. But what was the alternative? To surrender? To give up the woman he loved? No. He had come this far. He had put his life on the line. He would not back down now. He would fight for his love with every ounce of his strength, even if that strength was not enough. He had to show Kicking Bear that a man's honor was not just in his ability to run, but in his will to stand. "I accept the terms," Jed said, his voice firm, his resolve unbending. The words felt like a physical act of defiance, a declaration of his unwavering will. "I will race you, Chief, and I will win." Ayanna, who had been watching from the cabin window, felt a cold knot of dread in her stomach. Her heart ached with a profound, quiet terror. A race. A man of the plains against a man of the hills. A man who was light and agile against a man who was heavy and strong. She knew the outcome. She wanted to run out there, to beg Jed to reconsider, to plead with Kicking Bear, to choose a different test. But she knew it was no use. The pride of both men was at stake. This was a test of two worlds, two ways of life, and she was caught in the middle. She saw the look on Jed's face, the grim determination, the unyielding resolve. He was not just fighting for her freedom, he was fighting for his own soul. He was a man who would not back down, a man who would not surrender. And in that moment, she knew that she loved him more than life itself. Kicking Bear gave Jed one of his most trusted braves to lead him to the starting line. Silas gave Jed a small sack for his stone. Jed was to wear his boots, while Kicking Bear would wear his moccasins. This was a detail that further cemented Kicking Bear's confidence. Jed's boots were heavy, slow. Kicking Bear's moccasins were light and fast. He had every advantage. He had chosen the battle, and he had chosen the weapons. Jed walked to the starting line, his legs feeling like lead. He looked at the twin peaks in the distance, their jagged spires, a promise of his certain defeat. He felt a profound fear, not for his life, but for the future he would lose. He was about to race for the woman he loved, against a man who would not only win, but would savor his defeat. He looked back at his cabin, at the small figure of Ayanna in the window. He had to win. He had to fight for her, no matter the cost. His life was no longer his own. It belonged to her. He was a man with nothing to lose and everything to gain. He was a man who would not back down, not now, not ever. The race was about to begin, and with it, a new world would be born. The starting line was a simple marker in the dirt, a few miles from the ranch, a silent witness to the clash of two worlds. Kicking Bear stood across from Jed, his body a picture of calm, effortless confidence. He was a man who knew he would win. His face was a mask of pride, his eyes a cold, confident gleam. He was a man who was fighting a battle he had already won. Jed, in contrast, felt every pound of his own weight, every creak in his joints, every ache in his muscles. He was a man of strength, a man of hard work, but not a man of speed. He was a man who had not run in years. The air, which had been thick with tension, now hummed with a different kind of energy, one of quiet, expectant anticipation. The Apache warriors watched in silent reverence, their eyes fixed on their chief, a man who was about to show a lesser man what it meant to be a man of the land. Silas, the trapper, acted as the official. He held up a small leather sack containing 2 stones of roughly the same size, a simple, unassuming symbol of a monumental wager. "The rule is simple," he said in his halting Apache, his voice a low, gravelly hum. "You must each reach the Great Spirit Spring, retrieve a stone, and return to this spot. The first man to cross this line with the stone in his hand is the winner." He looked at both men, his face serious, his eyes a solemn, knowing gaze. "Let honor be your guide." Jed looked at Kicking Bear, his gaze firm, his eyes a cold, hard grey. The chief's eyes held a cold amusement, a silent, mocking sneer. He was watching Jed, waiting for him to break, waiting for him to surrender, waiting for him to fall. He knew Jed was a man who was out of his element. He was a man who was fighting a battle he could not win. He was a man who was about to lose everything. Kicking Bear spoke, his voice a low rumble, filled with a chilling, triumphant certainty. "The Great Spirit favors the swift and the true," he said. "You are neither, white man. You are a ghost on this land, a man who does not belong. You will lose." Jed did not reply. He simply met the chief's gaze, his eyes a cold, hard grey. He did not need words. He would show him. He would prove him wrong. He would fight with every ounce of his strength, every ounce of his will. He would not surrender. He would not back down. He would show Kicking Bear what it meant to be a man of honor, a man who would not give up on the woman he loved. Silas raised his hand in the air. The sun was hot on their backs, the air still and silent. The world seemed to hold its breath. Ayana was watching from the cabin, her heart in her throat, her eyes fixed on the 2 figures in the distance. She was praying, a silent, desperate plea to the spirits of the land to watch over the man she loved, to give him strength, to give him courage. She knew the odds were against him. She knew that he was a man who was fighting a losing battle, but she also knew that he was a man who would not give up. And in that moment, she knew that she loved him more than life itself. Silas lowered his hand with a sharp, decisive gesture. "Go!" he shouted. Jed and Kicking Bear took off. Kicking Bear, with the grace and agility of a wild animal, sprinted away, his feet a blur of speed. His body was a picture of effortless motion, his moccasins silent against the dirt. He was a man born to this land. A man who ran with the speed and power of a wolf. He was a man who was a part of the earth, a man who was at home in his own skin. He was a man who would not be defeated. Jed, in contrast, started with a slow, powerful stride. His boots were heavy, his legs felt like lead. He was not a natural runner. He was a man who fought for every step. He could feel his lungs burning, his heart pounding in his chest. He watched Kicking Bear get further and further away, a small receding figure in the distance. He felt a surge of despair, a cold certainty of his own defeat. But then he thought of Ayana, of her smile, of her hand in his. He thought of the future they could have together, a future of peace, of love, of a new beginning. And he pushed on. He would not stop. He would not give up. He would fight for her, even if that fight meant running on legs that felt like they were on fire. The race was on, a race for a woman's freedom, for a man's honor, and for a love that was worth more than life itself. He was a man who was fighting for his soul, a man who would not give up on the woman he loved. And in that moment, he was a hero. The first mile was a brutal lesson in humility. Kicking Bear was a blur of motion, his powerful legs eating up the ground with the effortless grace of a born hunter. He moved across the plains like a shadow, his moccasins silent against the dusty earth, a whisper of a man in motion. Jed, in contrast, was a study in grim, laborious effort. His heavy boots thudded with each stride, a loud jarring sound that felt like a betrayal of his own body. His muscles, more accustomed to the slow, steady burn of ranch work, protested with a deep, persistent ache. He was falling behind, and with every passing minute the distance between them grew. The humiliation of it was a bitter taste in his mouth, a cold, hard knot of shame. He was a rancher, not a runner, and Kicking Bear's lead was a physical manifestation of his own inadequacy, a silent, powerful taunt. But Jedediah Miller had survived on this unforgiving land, not through speed, but through stubbornness. He had built his ranch with sweat and sheer will, a monument to his unyielding spirit. And he would run this race with the same unyielding spirit. He found his rhythm, a slow, steady gait that conserved his energy. He wouldn't try to match Kicking Bear's speed, he would try to outlast it. He knew the land intimately, every rise and fall, every hidden gully, every secret path. He saw a winding creek bed a few hundred yards ahead, a path that was rockier and more treacherous than the open ground, but was also a more direct line to the peaks. Kicking Bear, confident in his speed, stayed on the smoother, longer path. Jed, however, veered off, his boots scrambling over loose stones, his mind focused on the small advantage he might gain. He was a man of the land, a man who knew the secrets of the earth. He was not a runner, but he was a survivor. The pain in his lungs was a constant fire, a burning, relentless agony. The sun beat down on him, and the heat radiated up from the ground, making the air thick and heavy. He thought of his wife and son, a cold, hard ache that had once been his only companion. But now he had a new source of fuel. He saw Ayanna's face in his mind's eye, her defiant spirit, the courage she had shown in choosing him. She was his reason for living, the light in the darkness he had been living in for years. He would not fail her. He would not give up. He would run until his legs gave out, and then he would crawl. As he ran, Jed noticed the small, subtle signs of the land. He saw the way the wind moved the grass, the way the birds flew overhead, the way the shadows stretched and shrank. He saw a small, dry gulch that he knew would lead to a more shaded, cooler path. He was no hunter, but he was a survivor. Kicking Bear was running for glory, for pride. Jed was running for his life, for his love. The motivation was different, and Jed knew that in the long run, the man with the stronger will, not the faster legs, would win. He pushed on, his body a well of pain, his mind a fortress of resolve. The twin peaks grew larger on the horizon, their jagged spires a promise of the finish line and a symbol of his desperate hope. He could no longer see Kicking Bear, but he knew he was out there, a force of nature running for an old world. Jed was running for a new one, a world where love and honor were not for sale. He began to climb the foothills of the peaks, the terrain becoming steeper, more unforgiving. His pace slowed to a walk, but he did not stop. He was a machine of sheer will, pushing through the pain, fueled by a love that was worth more than life itself. The sun was high in the sky now, a brutal, unforgiving presence. He knew he was still far behind, but he also knew that he was not defeated. Not yet. He had to keep moving. He had to keep pushing. He had to prove to himself, to Kicking Bear, and to Ayanna that a man's heart could be his greatest weapon. He was a man who would not back down, a man who would not surrender, and in that moment he was a hero. He was a man who was fighting for his soul, a man who would not give up on the woman he loved. And in that moment, he was a hero. He was a man who was fighting for his soul, a man who would not give up on the woman he loved. The base of the Twin Peaks was a maze of jagged rocks and sharp-edged cliffs, a desolate and unforgiving landscape. Jed finally reached it, his body trembling with exhaustion, his muscles screaming in protest. His lungs burned, his legs ached with a deep, persistent throb. He had been running for what felt like an eternity, and the thought of the climb ahead was a cold, hard stone in his stomach. He looked up at the two spires, their granite faces a grim, unyielding challenge. He was a climber, a man of the earth but not of the rock. He took a moment to rest, gulping down the last of his water. He had no idea how far ahead Kicking Bear was. For all he knew, the chief had already reached the spring and was on his way back. The thought spurred him on. The path to the Great Spirit's spring was a treacherous descent. It was a narrow, rocky trail that wound down into a deep, shaded ravine, a path that was as beautiful as it was dangerous. Jed moved carefully, his hands and feet searching for purchase, his mind focused on the task at hand. One wrong step, and he would plummet to his death. He thought of Ayana, of the life he was fighting for, and he pushed on, a singular focus in his mind. He had to make it. He had to find the stone. He finally reached the bottom of the ravine. It was a beautiful, peaceful place, a small oasis of life in the middle of a rocky wasteland. A clear, cold spring bubbled up from the ground, its water clean and pure. The sound of the water was a music to his ears, a sweet, gentle melody that soothed his aching body. He knelt, cupped his hands and drank deeply, the cold water a jolt of life in his exhausted body. He felt a moment of profound, quiet gratitude for this small, hidden place, a place that was a testament to the power of the land. He looked at the bottom of the spring and saw the small, smooth stones that were a part of the test. He reached in, his fingers numb with the cold, and retrieved one. It was a small, smooth, oval stone, a simple token of his journey, a small, tangible piece of his victory. He put the stone in his pocket and prepared for the climb back up. But as he turned, he saw something that made his heart stop. A few feet away, in a small alcove of the ravine, there was a small leather bag. Kicking Bear's bag. He had been here. He had found the spring, but where was he now? Jed looked around, his heart pounding with a cold dread. He climbed up a few feet and saw it. Kicking Bear. He was a few hundred yards away, on the other side of the ravine, at the base of a sharp cliff face. He was not moving. Jed could see the dark, ugly stain on his leg, a silent, ugly testament to his fall. He had fallen. He was injured. He had not made it back. And the small leather bag in the alcove, it was the one he had been carrying. His stone was gone. He had dropped it, and it was now lost in the depths of the ravine. Jed looked at Kicking Bear, at the man who had been his enemy, his rival, the man who had wanted to take away the love of his life. He could simply turn and walk away. He could take his stone and win the race. He could have his victory. But as he looked at the man, at the pain and frustration on his face, Jed saw something else. He saw a man of honor, a man who had been injured, who had lost his most prized possession. He saw a man who had been defeated not by an enemy, but by the land itself. He saw a fellow human being, and in that moment, Jed knew what he had to do. He could not win this race by leaving a man to die, even if that man was his enemy. He had to choose between his victory and his honor. It was a choice that would define him, a choice that would determine not just his future, but his very soul. He was a man who had fought for his love, and now he was a man who would fight for his honor. And in that moment, he was a hero. He was a man who would not back down, a man who would not surrender. He was a man who would win a war with a single act of peace. The choice that Jed faced was a crossroads between two worlds, a moral chasm as deep and unforgiving as the ravine itself. One path, the one dictated by a lifetime of frontier logic and self-preservation, led to his immediate victory, to his freedom, and to the life with Ayana that he had fought so desperately for. To take this path, he simply had to turn and walk away, leaving his rival to his own fate. It was the easy way, the expected way. The other path, forged in a single gut-wrenching moment of compassion, was an uncertain future, a selfless act of kindness that would surely cost him the race and, quite possibly, his life. The man who had been his enemy was now, by the cruelest of ironies, a man in desperate need. The race, which had been about winning, was now about the very soul of the man Jed was. Jed looked at the small, smooth stone in his hand, a tangible symbol of his victory. It felt heavy, not just with its own weight, but with the weight of his promise to Ayana. He could simply turn and leave. Kicking Bear was not his responsibility. He was a rival. He had challenged Jed to a test of honor, and Jed was winning. But the man Jed was, the man Ayana had seen and loved, was not a man who would leave a person to suffer. He had saved a woman he didn't know. He would not leave a man he had come to know, even one who had threatened his life and his love. A cold, hard voice of reason in his mind screamed at him to run. He had no obligation to this man. He had nothing to gain from helping him and everything to lose. He thought of Ayana, of her face when she saw him return, victorious and whole. The relief in her eyes would be his greatest prize. But a deeper, more profound voice, one that had been awakened by Ayana's presence in his life, spoke of a different kind of prize. It spoke of a love that was not built on a hollow victory, but on a foundation of genuine character and compassion. It was a voice that reminded him of the man he wanted to be. He carefully put the stone in his pocket and began to make his way to Kicking Bear. The chief saw him coming, and his eyes, which had been filled with a pain he was too proud to show, now filled with a cold, hard suspicion. He had expected Jed to turn and leave. He had expected him to win, to claim his victory and his prize. He had not expected him to return, not after he had made it so clear that their conflict was a matter of life and death. The silent, unmoving line of his warriors, still waiting in the distance, was a testament to his authority. Jed's return was an act that defied all logic, all reason. "What do you want, white man?" Kicking Bear asked, his voice a low, hostile growl, laced with a new kind of bewilderment. He had been a master of his own destiny, and now, for the first time, he was entirely at the mercy of another. "You have won. Go. Take your prize." "I have not won yet," Jed said, his voice quiet but firm. He knelt beside the chief, his eyes on the wounded leg, and in that moment the racial and cultural divide between them seemed to vanish. He saw only a man in pain, a man who had fallen, a man who had lost. "You are hurt." Kicking Bear's face contorted into a snarl of anger and humiliation. He was a chief, a warrior, a man who had never needed help. To accept it from his enemy was a shame worse than death. "I do not need your help. I am a chief. I am a warrior." Jed ignored his protests. He reached out and carefully touched the leg. The ankle was swollen and discolored, a dark, ugly bruise spreading beneath the skin. It was clearly a bad sprain, if not a break. The fall had been a bad one. Kicking Bear had been so focused on his speed, on his will to win, that he had not seen the loose rock that had caused him to fall. He was a man of the land, a master of the hunt, but even a master could make a mistake. "You will not be able to walk on this," Jed said, his voice calm and firm, a voice of reason and authority. "And you have lost your stone." He pointed to the empty leather pouch that was now a symbol of his defeat. Kicking Bear's face went pale with a cold, defeated rage. The race was over. His honor was lost. His pride was shattered. The warrior who had been so sure of his own victory was now a prisoner of his own pain, a man who had lost not to a better fighter, but to a better man. Jed reached into his own pocket and pulled out a small cloth. He took a moment to tear a long strip from his shirt, the sound of the ripping fabric a loud, jarring sound in the quiet of the ravine. He carefully wrapped the cloth around Kicking Bear's ankle, his hands steady and gentle, his movements a testament to his rancher's instincts, to his years of tending to the wounded. Kicking Bear watched him with a look of stunned disbelief. This man, his enemy, was helping him. This man who he had come to destroy was showing him compassion. It was a foreign concept to him. It was a new world, a world where a man's strength was not in his will to win, but in his will to help. You should have left me," Kicking Bear said, his voice now a low, bewildered whisper, filled with a new, quiet humility. "You should have won. That is the way of your people." Jed looked at him, his gaze clear and honest. "I am not a man who wins by leaving a man to die," he said. "I am a man who wins by helping a man to live." He stood up, his body tired but his heart full. He looked at Kicking Bear, and he held out his hand, a simple gesture that carried the weight of 1,000 words. "Now, Chief, let us finish this race, together." The challenge was not just to a man, but to a code of honor, to a world that was about to change. Kicking Bear looked at Jed's outstretched hand, and in that moment he saw not a rival, but a man of true honor. And for the first time in his life, he understood that there was more to life than just winning. There was an honor in defeat, a strength in kindness, a power in a helping hand that a man of his world had never known. Kicking Bear looked at Jed's outstretched hand, a complex mixture of emotions warring on his face. He saw not pity, but respect. Not a victor's arrogance, but a man's genuine desire to help. This was not the way of his people. A man's enemy was a man to be destroyed, not aided. But this white man had broken the rules. He had shown him a kindness that he, in his pride, would never have shown to Jed. The weight of Jed's actions pressed down on him, a heavy, silent testament to a different kind of strength. His mind, so accustomed to a world of black and white, of enemy and ally, struggled to comprehend this new, confounding reality. He had always believed that a man's worth was in his ability to conquer, to take what was his, to show his dominance. But Jed had shown him a different kind of power. A power that came from the heart, a power that could not be measured by speed or by strength. It was a power that was born of compassion, and it was a power that Kicking Bear, a chief and a warrior, had never known. He looked at Jed's face, at the clear, honest look in his eyes, and he knew that this man was not an enemy. He was a teacher. He was a man who had shown him that there was more to life than just winning. With a grunt of pain and an even deeper grunt of humiliation, Kicking Bear took Jed's hand. Jed helped him to his feet. Kicking Bear's arm wrapped around Jed's shoulders. The two men, a rancher and a chief, walked together, their movements slow and laborious, but filled with an unspoken understanding. They were no longer rivals. They were two men, making their way back from a journey that had changed them both. The silence between them was not a silence of hostility, but a silence of shared experience. It was a silence that spoke of a new kind of friendship, a friendship that was not built on a common enemy, but on a shared respect for a different kind of honor. They walked in silence for a long time, the quiet broken only by the sound of Jed's boots and Kicking Bear's soft groans of pain. Jed did not rush. He did not push. He simply walked with the chief, his body a support for the man who had wanted to be his destroyer. Kicking Bear looked at him with a new kind of respect, a respect born of a shared experience. He saw a man who was not afraid, a man who had nothing to gain from this act, but had everything to lose. And in that moment, Kicking Bear felt a profound sense of humility, a humility that he had never known. As they walked, Kicking Bear spoke, his voice low and filled with a new, quiet humility. My pride was great, he said. It blinded me. I saw you as a thief, a man who stole what was mine. I did not see you as a man. He paused, his gaze fixed on the ground, as if the words themselves were a weight on his soul. My people believe that a man's strength is in his speed, in his cunning, in his will to win. But you have shown me a different kind of strength. The strength of a man who cares for another, even when he has nothing to gain. Jed did not reply. There was nothing to say. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. They continued to walk, their pace a slow, steady rhythm. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in a blaze of orange and red. They were far from the ranch, and they knew it would be a long, painful journey back. But they were together. They were no longer enemies. They were two men, walking side by side, a testament to the power of a single act of kindness to bridge a great divide. The race was no longer about winning, it was about survival. And in this new, unexpected test, Jed was passing with flying colors. His honor was no longer a question, it was a fact, and he was about to show Kicking Bear and his tribe what it meant to be a man of true, unyielding honor, a man who could win a war with a single act of peace. He was about to show them that a man's heart was his greatest weapon, and that a man's love was his greatest strength. The journey back was a slow, agonizing pilgrimage, a two-headed shadow against the setting sun. Jed and Kicking Bear walked side by side, a quiet, powerful testament to a new understanding. Kicking Bear's leg was a constant throb of pain, but he did not complain. He was a man of immense physical and mental fortitude, and his pride would not allow him to show weakness. But the pain was there, a grim reality that Jed could feel in the way the chief leaned on his arm. He was no longer a man who had defeated a chief. He was a man who was helping a friend. The weight of Kicking Bear's arm on his shoulder was a testament to the new bond between them. They walked for hours, their pace a slow, shuffling rhythm. The moon rose, a cold, silent witness to their journey. They finally reached the crest of a hill and saw the ranch in the distance, a small, dark shape in the moonlit landscape. Jed saw the flicker of a fire, a sign that Ayana was still awake, still waiting. His heart swelled with a powerful sense of relief and love. He was coming back to her. And he was coming back to her a different man, a man who had not just won a race, but had won a soul. As they got closer to the ranch, Jed saw the line of Apache warriors in the distance. They were still there, a silent, menacing presence. But now, as they saw the two figures approaching, there was a change. They saw their chief, walking with the white man, leaning on his arm, a sign of weakness that they did not understand. Whispering, Wolf, the elder, rode forward, his face a mask of confusion. "Chief?" he asked, his voice filled with a stunned disbelief. What has happened? The race. It is over." Kicking Bear looked at Jed, then at his own people. He let go of Jed's arm and stood straight, a small grimace of pain on his face. "I have lost," he said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone, filled with a profound humility. "The race is over. The white man has won." He pointed to Jed. "He showed me a kindness I did not deserve. I fell, I was hurt, I lost my stone. He could have left me to die, but he helped me. He is a man of honor. He is a man of his word." He turned to Jed, his gaze a new, profound respect. "I owe you my life, white man. I cannot repay this debt, but I will honor our agreement." Jed looked at the chief, his heart filled with a powerful sense of peace. He had won, not just the race, but the battle for Kicking Bear's heart. He held out his hand, and Kicking Bear, with the solemnity of a man who had learned a great lesson, shook it. The handshake was a testament to the new bond between them, a bond forged in a shared experience of pain and a mutual respect for honor. It was a moment that transcended language, a moment that spoke of a new world, a world where enemies could become friends, and where honor could be found in a helping hand. The Apache warriors watched in silence, their faces a mix of confusion and wonder. They had seen their chief, a man who had never been defeated by a white man. They had seen him walk back with his enemy, his arm around his shoulder, a sign of friendship that they did not understand. And now they heard him speak of honor, of a kindness that had changed his heart. Kicking Bear turned to Jed and said, "The woman is your wife. You will have a good life. I will tell the story of this day to my people. The story of the white man who did not let a chief fall. The story of a new kind of strength. The woman is your wife. She has made her choice. You have earned her. You will have a good life." He looked at Jed one last time, a ghost of a smile on his face. "Go," he said. "Your wife is waiting for you, and your home is waiting for you. It is your home. It is your family." Jed nodded, a lump in his throat. He turned and walked to his cabin. He was home. He was with the woman he loved, and he had, in a single act of kindness, changed a man, a tribe, and a world. The test was over. The race was won. And the greatest victory was not on the land, but in the heart. The morning was a blur of activity, a waking dream of a new world. Ayana had seen Jed and Kicking Bear returning together, and was both terrified and relieved. She had run out to meet them, her heart a wild drum in her chest. She had tended to Kicking Bear's ankle, using the ancient remedies of her people, her hands gentle, and her heart filled with a mixture of pity and gratitude. Jed had told her everything, and she had listened in stunned silence, a look of profound love and admiration on her face. Her man had not only won the race, he had also won the heart of his rival. He had won her freedom with a different kind of strength, a strength that was far more powerful than any gun or any race. The final meeting was to take place in the morning, at the same spot where the two men had first met. Kicking Bear, his ankle wrapped and his face now a mask of quiet contemplation, sat across from Jed. The Apache warriors were gathered, their faces serious and expectant. Silas, the trapper, stood as a witness, his face a mix of awe and wonder. He had never seen a conflict of this magnitude resolved in such a manner. He was a man of the frontier, a man who had seen countless battles, countless deaths, but he had never seen a peace born of a single act of kindness. Kicking Bear spoke, his voice strong and clear. "I have lost the race. I have lost my honor, but I have found something more. I have found a friend." He looked at Jed. "This white man, this rancher, is a man of honor. He could have left me to die in the rocks. He could have won the race. But he chose a different path. He chose to help me. He chose to save my life. I have lost the race, but I have not lost my life. And for that, I am grateful." He turned to his people, and his voice was filled with a new, quiet authority. "This white man is not our enemy. He is a man of a different kind of honor, a man who understands the Great Spirit's plan." He then turned to Ayana, his gaze a mixture of regret and respect. He had seen the love in her eyes for Jed, a love that was deeper and more profound than any love he had ever known. He had seen the kind of man Jed was, a man who was worthy of that love. "Ayana," he said, his voice now soft and paternal, "you have made a choice. Your heart is with this man. Your heart is a thing that cannot be promised, cannot be sold. Your father made a promise to me, but I cannot hold you to that promise. You are free. You are your own person. You have chosen a new path, and I will respect your choice. I will tell your father that you are safe, that you are with a man of honor, and I will tell him that your choice is a choice that has brought a new kind of peace to our people." Ayana's heart soared. This was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment she had fought for. She looked at Jed, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude and love. She walked to Kicking Bear and knelt before him, her head bowed. "I thank you, Chief," she said, her voice filled with a quiet dignity. "You have given me my life, and I will always honor you. I will always remember your kindness." Kicking Bear placed a hand on her shoulder and helped her up. He then turned to Jed, and with a small, gracious gesture, he gave his final blessing. "The woman is yours, white man. She is your wife. You will have a good life, and I will tell the story of your honor to my people. Your story will live on." Jed felt a lump in his throat. He had won. The battle was over. The war was over. He looked at Ayana, at the woman who had fought for her freedom, at the man who had helped her to fight, and at the chief who had learned a great lesson in humility. He knew that their story was not just about two people, but about two worlds coming together, a testament to the power of a single act of honor to change the course of history. The standoff was over, the siege was over, the race was won, and the greatest victory was not in the land, but in the heart. The Apache warriors began to pack up their camp, their movements now a silent, respectful tribute to a man who had shown them a new way of life. The two worlds were no longer at war. They were at peace. The last of the Apache warriors rode away in a cloud of dust, their departure a quiet, respectful pilgrimage. The silence that settled over the ranch was different now. It was not the oppressive silence of a siege, the heavy stillness of a standoff. It was the soft, gentle quiet of a new beginning, the sweet stillness of peace. The land felt different. The air felt different. The sun, which had been a harsh, relentless enemy, was now a warm, friendly presence, a source of life and light. The ranch, which had been a lonely, solitary fortress, was now a home, a sanctuary of love and peace. Jed and Ayana stood together on the porch, their hands intertwined, their gazes fixed on the horizon where the last of the warriors had disappeared. They were alone now, but they were no longer lonely. Their journey had not only brought them together, but it had also changed them, making them stronger, more resilient, and more in love than they had ever been. Ayana leaned her head against Jed's shoulder, her heart filled with a quiet sense of peace. "They are gone," she whispered, her voice a soft, loving sound. "We are safe." Jed tightened his grip on her hand. "We were always safe, Ayana," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We were safe from the moment you came into my life. We were safe from the moment I knew you were worth fighting for. We were safe from the moment I knew that our love was stronger than any race, stronger than any battle, stronger than any prejudice." They stood there for a long time, their hands intertwined, a testament to their love, to their shared journey, to the two worlds they had brought together. The land was still the same, the cabin was still the same, but they were different. They were a family. They were a couple who had faced down an army and had come out on the other side, their love stronger, their bond unbreakable. Jed looked at the hill where his wife and son were buried, and he felt a profound sense of peace. He had not forgotten them, but he had found a new reason to live. He had found a new purpose. He had found a new family. He had found a new love. The sun began to set, painting the sky in a blaze of colors, a final, triumphant spectacle. The stars began to appear one by one, 1,000 tiny lights in the vast, inky sky. Jed looked at the stars and thought of the woman who had taught him to see them in a different way. He had seen them as a map, a guide. She had seen them as a story, a tapestry of love and loss. Now he saw them as both. He saw them as their story, a story that would be told not just in their world, but in the world of the Apache. A story of a white man's honor and a woman's courage, a story that would live on in the hearts of both peoples for generations to come. He turned to Ayana, and in the deepening twilight, he saw her beautiful face, her eyes filled with a new kind of light, a light that shone brighter than any star. He leaned down and kissed her, a kiss of quiet, profound love, a kiss that sealed their new beginning. The lonely rancher had found his home. The Apache bride had found her freedom. And together, they had found a love that was worth more than life itself. The end was a new beginning, a testament to the power of a single act of kindness to change the world.